started the week. Northern Scotland's been colder, but even here it is turning milder and, for many, wetter as we head into the evening. Some persistent and heavy rain across Scotland could cause some issues over the higher parts where it's been very wet recently and there's some snow melt. And for Wales as well, some wet weather could cause some issues overnight. But the rain in many places eases. There'll be some cloud breaks developing. It stays windy though, and those winds bring mild air. 12 Celsius in the south first thing, 5 to 8 further north. And it's a wet start in the southeast, but that clears. Northeast Scotland takes a bit longer to clear the rain. But for many, it's a drier and brighter day. The main area of showers affecting Northern Ireland, Southern Scotland, Northern England. Otherwise, decent cloud breaks, some sunshine coming through for the Midlands and Eastern England in particular, and very mild, 13 or 14 Celsius in the south, 8 to 10 further north. Some damp weather affecting the far southwest and then the south during the second half of Wednesday. That mostly disappears overnight, but it stays cloudy towards the southwest with some spots of rain, and there'll be further showers in the northwest as well. But for many, it's a dry start to Thursday, a little less mild, but still temperatures above average, and some sunshine first thing for Eastern England, Northern Scotland. Northern Scotland, perhaps a touch of frost, otherwise it's frost-free. A lot of cloud rushes in from the southwest through the morning, so any sunshine tending to disappear by the afternoon. Some damp weather about, but most places dry except for Scotland and Northern Ireland, where it turns increasingly wet, and then later on, much windier.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's 6 o'clock. I'm Michelle Dewberry, and this is Dewbs & Co, the show where we'll get into some of the things that have got you talking today. And I'll tell you something that's got us talking for weeks and months now, the NHS. Let's face it, it is pretty much broken now, isn't it? Is it at the end of the road? Some people are saying it's time for a national critical incident to be declared so that the army can step in and help sort out some of the problems that we're experiencing in, for example, places like A&E. Is that the answer? Also, more strikes pretty much everywhere, quite frankly. Are we ever going to see the end of this? Should the government just cave and give everyone whatever it is that they're asking for? What do you reckon to that? And a Tory MP, speaking of them, have got themselves into hot water recently because the Fire Brigade Union basically tweeted, their words, not mine, many firefighters are being forced to use feed banks because they earn £32,000 a year. The Tory MP says they're not prioritising and they're bad at budgeting. Is he right or not? And us women in the workplace, some would say we've had to fight hard to get our place here. Now, many women are saying that we should have a legal right to know what our male counterparts are earning in the workplace. Really? Would you want your salary made public, to be picked over and probably people to be made jealous over? Or should we all just be responsible for negotiating the best deal we can get our hands on? I want your thoughts on all of that, but first let's bring ourselves up to speed with tonight's latest headlines.
Hello, it is 2 minutes past 6. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. Over 40,000 rail workers are staging fresh strikes this week. It is causing major disruption for people returning to work after the Christmas break. 4 out of every 5 trains have been cancelled as members of the RMT union at Network Rail and 14 train operators are walking out for 48 hours from today. They'll do the same on Friday, while drivers in the ASLEF union will strike on Thursday. It is part of the long-running dispute over pay and conditions, which the RMT General Secretary Mick Lynch says is vital for the future of the industry.
Up to the government now to show us that they mean business and that they want to facilitate some talks, rather than undermining them as we believe they did before Christmas by putting provisions in that they know none of the railway unions can accept. So if we can get some realistic talks with some proper proposals and progressive talks, we'll work with all the parties to get that on.
However, the Transport Secretary Mark Harper says it is time for the unions to get off the picket line and get round the negotiating table.
Government's going to continue to work really hard to try and help bring the two sides together to get this resolved. I know how frustrating this is for commuters, and the danger is it puts people off using the railways, which is a bit of self-harm on the part of the rail unions that haven't settled this dispute. What I think the government can do is make sure there's a fair and reasonable offer on the table, which there is, facilitate those negotiations between employers and trade unions, and try and make sure we get this dispute resolved for the travelling public.
The government insists it is doing everything possible to increase hospital capacity as top medics describe the current situation as unbearable. More than a dozen NHS trusts and ambulance services declared critical incidents over the festive period. The Royal College of Emergency Medicine says somewhere between 300 and 500 people are dying each week as a result of delays in urgent care. Well, the Health Secretary Steve Barclay says the government is providing more funding.
Focusing the funding onto the operations backlogs, for example, getting more diagnostic hubs in place, getting the surgical hubs that we're rolling out, getting the backlog from the pandemic reduced. That's been the key priority. That's where we've surged additional funding. But we also recognise the big pressure that we're seeing played through in terms of ambulance handover delays is largely triggered by those who are fit to leave hospital but delayed in doing so. And we need to free up that bed capacity, and that is often about having the right social care provision to do so.
People travelling to England from China will not be forced to quarantine if they test positive for COVID on arrival. The government says the move is about collecting information due to the Beijing government's refusal to share its own coronavirus data following a surge in cases there. Testing will be optional for passengers landing at Heathrow Airport. Under the new measures, people flying to England from China, they will be required to show a negative COVID test before boarding the plane. A married British couple are among 4 people who've been killed in a mid-air crash between 2 helicopters in Australia. Diane and Ron Hughes, aged 57 and 65, from Merseyside. They were on holiday when the accident happened yesterday in the Gold Coast region. 3 others were left critically injured. Queensland police say the initial investigations indicate the collision occurred when one helicopter was taking off and the other was landing. The Prime Minister says Ukraine can count on the UK for ongoing long-term support. Rishi Sunak held a call with the President, Volodymyr Zelensky, this afternoon, where Sunak pledged to provide further equipment in the coming weeks to help ensure Ukraine's victory on the battlefield. The UK has recently delivered more than 1,000 anti-air missiles in recent days in response to a renewed wave of Russian attacks. And thousands of mourners have lined the streets to pay their final respects to the Brazilian football legend Pelé. His coffin was carried on a fire truck from the stadium of his former club Santos through the neighbourhood where his mother still lives to a private family funeral. Earlier, the newly sworn-in Brazilian president, Lula da Silva, was amongst the 230,000 people to file past the open casket in the stadium, where Pelé's body lay in state for 24 hours. The 3-time World Cup winner died from cancer last Thursday at the age of 82. TV, online and DAB plus radio. This is GB News. Now it is back to Dewbs and Co.
Thanks for that. Well, I'm with you right through till 7 o'clock this evening and keeping me company. Alongside me right through until then is Emma Bennell, the political consultant, and Asa Bennett, who's the former advisor to Liz Truss. And also it says, and speechwriter. Does that mean speechwriter generally or specifically just for Liz Truss?
Both then and now.
What was the word that she kept saying? There was one word. Was it your fault?
Delivery, step up.
No, there was one word. She kept...
Growth and growth.
Growth. I thought there was another one, but I've had a Christmas break since then and another Prime Minister,
that's
so
all right.
I can't remember it. What was that one word that, if it pops out to you
Pork
guys
cheese.
at home... Pork
market.
I can tell you, actually. Yes, pork market. Was that you? Was you
Before my time. That's the glory days. It was an early meme that she helped set up in politics.
I do find the political goings-on quite fascinating. It's a little bit beyond me sometimes. I think it's so kind of detached from the real world, I can tell you. But fascinating stuff. If anyone ever wants to be a speechwriter for me, get in touch and let me know, because I've got to be honest, I am supposed to write a little speech to start my programmes. And I keep forgetting. I'm blaming it on my Christmas holiday, so if you're listening... in fact, actually, I can recruit you in the break. You can write it for me. Good rates. We're going to come on to rates, actually, a little bit later on in the programme, because one of the things that I want to talk to you guys about tonight is us women in the workplace. Apparently, all we ever hear is about how much of a bum deal we get. And many people now are saying that us women should have a legal right to know what our male counterparts are earning in the world of work. Should we? So, like, I don't know, if Asa says good rates, should I have a legal entitlement to be able to ascertain, well, what is he being paid versus what I'm being paid?
Or me.
Or you. Yeah, I found all this a little bit odd, a little bit peculiar. I think my salary is my own business, quite frankly, and nobody else's. But where do you stand on that matter? I also want to talk to you about whether or not £32,000 or thereabouts is enough to live on in this country. Should you have to be forced, I quote, to use a food bank on that salary? That is what the Fire Brigade Union are saying today, but one Tory MP is having none of it. Where do you stand on all of that? And you guys have been getting in touch. Did you watch the show last night? Adrian says, Michelle, yesterday you wore bright red and he blamed that for the conflict between my guests, and I said I would wear black today to try and avoid conflict. I forgot. So I didn't wear black, I wore stripes. But we've had a chat with the panel. There'll be no talking over tonight. We're going to be a sensible bunch tonight. If you had a headache last night, I can tell you now, you're not alone. I want your thoughts tonight. Phil says, Michelle, you look like a Christmas present tonight. Phil, I don't take that as a compliment because Christmas is done now. So that means that I've been sat in the corner somewhere, probably gone a bit mouldy, a little bit out of date. I'll take your sentiment, but not sure about it. Chris has been in touch saying, Michelle, firefighters may get £32,000 a year, but the deductions are massive, he says. When I was a firefighter, I had to pay 12% pension payments, which took a fortune out of my packet. I'm fascinated by that, Chris. Do get back in touch with me and tell me, is that mandatory? Do you have to pay those kind of contributions? Employer contributions, by the way, let me just get this up so I don't misquote it, 28.8% apparently is the employer contributions to the pensions, of course, paid for by you and I, the taxpayers. What do you think to public sector pensions? I might get into that as well if I've got a little bit more time later on in the show. But right now, let's talk NHS, shall we? Did I tell you, by the way, the email address in case you're a new face and you eat a pair of ears today? gbviews@gbnews.uk is how you get hold of me. You can tweet me as well at gbnews or at Michelle Dewbs. And if you are new to the show or to the channel, welcome. Happy New Year to you. Welcome to the conversation and the debate. So the NHS then, 13 trusts have declared a critical incident. This is all because basically it's in a mess now, isn't it? We always have a winter problem, but apparently this one is worse than it was at the height of the pandemic. Asa, I'll come to you first. Some people are saying it's time to declare a national critical incident so that would allow us to have access, for example, to the army to step in and help matters. Where do you stand?
Well, look, the army's had to bail us out in so many ways. We've already seen them practically manning the border when the border force walked out. And so I can understand why these calls are coming. But then, you know, we need to give the army a break. At the same time, let's just step back and look at what the problems it's having right now. You know, health systems across Europe, they're all being similarly buffeted and rocked by very similar things, you know, by sort of COVID. And at the same time, they've had their own strains, you know, in recent years with flu and winter crises. But of course, very specifically with the NHS, it is kind of tragic that over the last few years, it's been battered especially by COVID. It's also had the strikes, the ambulance drivers walking out, nurses. And so it's no surprise it's kind of really feeling the crunch now more than ever in recent years. And it is also tragic that it seems like every winter it's practically in crisis. And
so you don't think now is the time to get the armed forces out and get something set up?
I wouldn't say so, but I see why it's attractive.
It's attractive to me, I can tell you. Emma, what about you?
I don't know is the answer, because I'm not in charge of the data of the NHS. And what I genuinely think is important is that we take that kind of decision out of the political realm. It shouldn't be a left-right, battering ram. For us to have Asa and I will have very different ideas about how to fix the NHS, about how the NHS should be funded, managed, run. But in terms of that kind of operational decision, I really think that should be a non-political decision. There should be a set of criteria that the NHS can provably hit or not provably hit, and that is when the trigger point should happen.
Well, the Lib Dems, for example, they're calling for Parliament to be recalled early. It's not supposed to be back till
When
Monday,
don't they call for Parliament to be recalled early?
But you see, I've got to say, I agree with them on that. I think Christmas is done and dusted. What you're still on Christmas holiday for? The country is crumbling all around us pretty much everywhere. You shouldn't be wherever it is, doing whatever it is. You should be in Parliament debating these critical issues, and I would be in favour, actually, of the Nightingale hospitals, or whatever you want to call them now, being recreated and have staffing by people like the armed forces to help us through this situation.
Well, as I say, I think that's a clinical and operational decision for the NHS. I don't think it should be a political one. In terms of whether Parliament should be in recess or not, I think it is important to remember that when MPs are in their constituencies, they're not necessarily on holiday. They're probably doing quite a lot of constituency work. They're talking and working with the people who are in their constituencies, and that's an important part of their job. Their job is not just to sit in the Houses of Parliament, and there's a real misconception about that. And I say that as much about Conservative MPs who I fight to depose as I do about Labour MPs who I fight to get elected.
Do you think it should have been recalled early?
No, I think I very much agree that MPs are doing valuable work with their constituents, going to Christmas events, New Year's events and all the rest. And you could bet your bottom dollar, of course.
Did you just say valuable work going to Christmas events?
Well, supporting, dealing, having their fingers on the pulses of their constituencies so they can understand how critical these issues are. And I'll tell you what, on Monday, no doubt they'll have chapter and verse about all the problems they're having in their local hospitals, whether, all the sort of issues they're having. And that's why, from the very first few days they're back, they're going to be, hitting the ground running, really getting to grips with this, having the debates and having it with the authority and, knowing what's going on.
Yeah, what do you think to that at home? Because I don't think you need to be in your local constituency talking to people, going to events to know that actually this is nationally. Was it 500 deaths a week now, excess deaths a week now because of failings in emergency care? You don't need to go to, I don't know, pick mine, Hull, for example, or wherever, to sit there to figure out you've got an issue. You can't switch a telly on, you can't read a newspaper, you can't, go online without seeing that people are dying. And this does feel worse than previous years.
Of course, and then this is because I think it's just the simple fact of the twin terror, if you like, of the COVID backlog, and have we got this resurgence now of COVID, whether it's a new strain, we'll see, time will tell, and in particular then the flu and strep A, and also the strikes. They've not been helping at all.
But we were not resilient when it came to we were talking about winter crisis before anyone had heard the word COVID.
In the Labour years, yeah.
Are you telling me we weren't talking about a winter crisis in 2017, 2018, 20... These are things that have been ongoing, and the NHS has been being ground down. And part of it is the big changes that happened in 2012 with the Health and Social Care Bill, and the dissolution of a national NHS into so many different parts that were supposed to compete with each other, that weren't able to talk properly to each other. All these different trusts that just don't really work together as a national whole. So there are a number of issues with the NHS, some of which predate COVID, a lot of which have been made significantly worse by COVID. But these are long-term problems. And I would say that I don't think that what happened under Labour kind of rebuilt the NHS from when it was on its knees in the 90s, but they did not take it into the modern world as much as I would have liked. There were problems, for example, with IT systems not joining up properly. Those were Labour issues. I'm always willing to say when Labour gets things wrong. But I do feel that, particularly since 2012, the issues that were kicked off by that bill, and the problem was everyone thought that bill was a disaster, but it wasn't like a disaster immediately, so therefore it wasn't considered an actual disaster. It was a slow-running disaster, and now we are at the point of impact. And so I think we've got to be really conscious to say the NHS is a wonderful thing, we should protect it, but the ways to protect it are to reform it. And then you and I can have a ding-dong, not necessarily on your show, Michelle, about how we do that, but how we make an NHS that is free at the point of use and fit for modern purpose. And
you've glossed over strikes. You've not mentioned what's happened recently.
We're going to come back to these strikes,
I think the strikes are a symptom of all of this. I think the strikes are as much of a part of the problem because they are a symptom of what's been happening, not the cause of it.
Well, I want to touch on these strikes in a bit more detail in a second after the break. Stuart's been in touch saying, Michelle, you keep talking about Nightingale hospitals, but who's going to staff them? I keep having the same answer. I do say, bring in the army. Robin says, oh, here we go. Michelle, again, obsessed with getting the army to do everything. Robin basically thinks I'm a bit ridiculous.
They are very good.
Yeah, well, and Robin, I'm assuming you're a man, I don't know. Robin is saying, why would you think that the Army's basic medical training would qualify them to take care of a Nightingale hospital? Well, because, Robin, what you would do is you would make the Nightingale hospitals like... what were they called?
Gamash.
Hospitals or whatever. So you take the people that are medically well to be discharged from hospital, you'd put them into these facilities, because really they don't need medical assistance necessarily, they just need attention and care and all that kind of stuff that I think the Army would be able to help with. And you get the Army to do everything these days, so why not that? Although if you are in the Army, are you shouting at your screen saying I'm talking absolute nonsense and you don't think that that's what you should be getting in touch with doing these days? I don't know, you tell me. What else are you guys saying? I'm going to take a quick break in a second, and when I come back I want to get into the strike situation. Where do you stand on all of that? Bob says, Michelle, the harsh truth is that not all frontline workers are up to scratch, and until we accept that, we'll never sort out the NHS problems. I'll speak out in defence of frontline workers, though, actually, Bob, if I may, because I do feel a little bit sorry for them. I think that a lot of them are working as hard as they possibly can. They're working very unsociable hours, very long shifts, and I think it's often the systems, the processes and some of the strategic decisions that are making life hard for them, actually, and probably making it hard for them to do their job. Simon says, have senior Army officials step in to sort down the top positions. I like what you're saying there. What you're basically saying, Simon, is if you're getting the efficiency of the Army to create efficiency in the NHS, maybe that might work more than just the frontline stuff. Christine says, I like this. Michelle, what an excellent idea of yours. Thank you. She says, if not the army, what about retired doctors? Didn't we do that in COVID times, by the way? Didn't we do a shout-out for volunteer people to come back into the NHS? Christine, yeah, I like that idea of yours as well. Get in touch with your thoughts. I'm going to take a quick break. gbviews@gbnews.uk is the email address. When I come back, Emma's just alluded to it, strikes. By the way, I forgot to mention this three-letter word that comes in my inbox, and I've just seen it pop up as I'm about to go to the break. Someone said, I've got one word to say to Emma, PFI.
I hold my hands up. Well, I don't hold my hands up. I didn't have nothing to do with it. But I was against PFI. It was a bad system. It was a bad system of finance. We did build new hospitals. It was not the best way of financing them.
Yeah, and some other people as well will say, what about Wales? Because obviously Labour are in full control in some respects of the NHS there. How's that building up? Are you in Wales? How is life for you there when it comes to the NHS? Get in touch, let me know your thoughts. I'm going to take a quick break. I'll see you in 2. When I come back, I want to talk to you about striking. Goodness gracious me, it's everywhere, isn't it? What we're going to do about it, folks, do you tell me and I'll see you in 2.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons? I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens,
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. Clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Michelle Dewberry, keeping you company right through till 7 o'clock this evening. Alongside me, Emma Burnell, who's a political consultant, and Asa Bennett, a speechwriter and former advisor to Liz Truss. Welcome back, everybody. Carly says, Michelle, I had to laugh today. I received a call from the NHS Trust asking why I'd not attended an appointment to have a blood transfusion. This appointment had been cancelled due to the strikes, she says. I had to explain I'd not received the letter informing me of the new appointment, probably due to the Royal Mail strike, and now I'm wondering whether or not I'll even be able to get to the new appointment due to the rail strikes, she says. Nothing in this country works anymore. Well, I can tell you, Carly, you've just teed me up nicely to my next topic, because I do want to talk about strikes. Let's just cut to the chase. Pretty much everyone, everywhere, it feels like anyway, are either striking, have been on strike, or are planning to strike. Of course, unions, there's a lot of talk about this kind of anti-strike laws that have been proposed by Rishi Sunak. This legislation, if it happened, would extend the plans to enforce minimum service levels, not only for rail services, but across the whole public sector, including places like the NHS workers, ambulance staff, teachers, and border force. I'll start with you on this, Emma. Do you think it is time to get tougher on striking, the parameters for doing so, etc.?
No, obviously not. I don't think that at all. And also, I don't think it's possible. I think that Sunak will really, really struggle to get any legislation that can get through Parliament, written and dealt with in time to get through in this Parliament, in time to deal with the current wave of strikes. I just think it's posturing. He's posturing. He's trying to sound like a big tough guy when he's a small weak guy. I mean, I wasn't actually talking about his size, but he is also
Sounds
quite
to me
short.
like you was.
No, he's. It just as in terms of his political demeanour, he just hasn't got the backup in Parliament to get through the things that he wants to get through. He can't pass even the slightest bit of controversial legislation, and I just can't see him getting this through in time to deal with any of it. So it just feels like he's posturing. He's trying to talk tough, but actually he won't be able to deliver tough, and actually nothing looks weaker than talking tough and failing to deliver. No, I don't think he should, because I don't think the answer to a workforce that is feeling so demeaned and so out of sorts that they have taken to going without pay for a day is to stop them from having that fundamental human right to withdraw their labour.
Yeah, I'm not sure they're talking about stopping it. I think they're talking more about making it perhaps more, not difficult, but perhaps more reflective of the overall workforce it is. So where do you stand on it?
Well, I think it should be harder to strike like this, particularly when we see this pandemic of industrial action that sort of blighted so many services. And it makes sense. I was fascinated by Emma's analysis. One particular aspect of it I'll just pull out. The idea that it actually, Rishi trying to push this through any sort of legislation is, dead on arrival. For two reasons. Firstly, we find in Europe, places like Belgium, Italy, Luxembourg, France, they have more minimum service level legislation. They have, there's such laws in place to make it tougher. And the second point, we are talking about manifesto policy. This is stuff that the Tories were elected in 2019 on. Liz was pushing it, Boris was pushing it, Ian Rishi clearly wants to do something with it, and so we'll have to see what it is. For the moment, he's clearly waiting, not necessarily, I'd suggest, because he's weak, but because he's trying to use it as a stick to dangle, while the unions are having their strikes, to try and sort of incentivise sort of particular good behaviour. We will see. And at the same time, I'm sure, of course, Labour and their union paymasters will have an issue or two in the House of Commons when it comes to the vote.
I mean, the unions are, and we're very proudly, affiliated to the Labour Party. I don't have a problem with saying that. The idea that the paymasters would come as quite a surprise, particularly to, say, the RMT, which are not affiliated to the Labour Party, to the Royal College of Nursing, also not affiliated to the Labour Party. So there are two different things there. One is that the Labour Party is largely funded by the working people and the money they pay in through their union. Secondly, many of those unions not feeling like they're getting the best deal from Keir Starmer at the moment, and several other of them are not affiliated at all, and those are the ones that we're largely talking about at the moment. So the idea that there's some sort of quid pro quo there is kind of silly. Back to Rishi Sunak. If he can get it through, fine. That's his democratic right. I will fight that because it's my democratic right to say I think it's the wrong thing to do. But my honest opinion is I don't think he can get it through. I don't think he can get it through Parliament. I don't think he can get it through some of his more fractious backbenches, particularly those in the Red Wall. And I don't think he can get it through the House of Lords in time for this to have any effect on this current wave of strikes.
Do you think these strikes are going to have the desired outcome? Because I think, for example, of the Royal Mail one, I just didn't send any Christmas cards this year. So I changed my behaviour because I just thought, I'm not going to waste my money, not going to waste my time, probably not going to get there, I just won't bother. And I now probably will stick to that going forward next year because actually it worked fine. I just took my Christmas cards with me when I saw my family and handed them out as opposed to posting them. And we all know that, for example, the Royal Mail is facing cash challenges. At the one time it did need to raise money was with that kind of Christmas spike in revenue. And I just wonder if some of these strikes are becoming almost self-defeatist, self-harming in a way, because all you're doing is forcing people to change their behaviour. Once they've changed it away from your products and service, it can be quite difficult to get them back again, those customers.
Oh, certainly. There's a real long-term risk of that. When we've seen it in the trains, people work from home more. That's how they get around the strikes there. As you're saying, when the Royal Mail is on strike and it's hard to send cards, you send e-cards, WhatsApps, texts, or as you say, hand deliver. You become the postman, in effect. So I think it's not just in terms of how the consumer, how the public reacts to this. There's that sort of risk they need to be aware of, and the government's made that clear too. It's also just how much they can afford this. Obviously, the unions are making clear, various particular ones, that they can afford to maybe go on to for the spring, but for beyond the summer, that's an open question, I guess, because you have to remember they don't make money. They have to be bailed out by hardship funds when they go out on strike.
Yeah, that's the point one of my viewers have just made as well. What they're saying is that the only winners in this strike action are the union leaders. You're saying it's those people that are not losing the money. But the flip side to that would be, as Emma is saying, that actually, is people really truly believe that they're doing this for the greater good and that times are hard. In fact, actually, in a second, I'll be talking about how hard times are because I'm going to take a quick break. But when I come back, a Tory MP is in trouble. He's come under a lot of criticism because the Fire Brigade Union have basically tweeted and said many firefighters earning £32,000 there or thereabouts have been forced to use food banks. That Tory MP, though, is saying that is because they're not prioritising their funds properly and they don't know how to budget. Some people are saying that's just the Tories being the nasty party and completely inappropriate. Is it? I don't know. You tell me and I'll see you in 2.
Coming up on Dan Wootton Tonight with Mark Dolan. With the health service in a death spiral, is it time to privatise the NHS? Mark asks the question the MSM isn't brave enough to tackle. Plus, there's opinion galore from comedy legend and free speech activist Graham Linehan, former Mumford & Sons musician Winston Marshall and Fleet Street icon Kelvin Mackenzie. That's Dan Wootton Tonight with Mark Dolan, 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. on GB News.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dewbs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Hello there, welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Michelle Dewberry, right through till 7 o'clock this evening. Alongside me, Emma Burnell, the political consultant, and Asa Bennett, the former advisor to Liz Truss and a speechwriter. You guys have been in touch in your droves on those last few topics. Richard says, Michelle, I've served in the Royal Navy for 17 years and I am sick to death with how the Army deal with strikes and emergencies. It's not just the Army, as people say. It is the military, the Royal Navy, the Royal Air Force and the Army. You saying, please, Michelle, think before you speak. It's not the army, it is the military. Richard, I will consider myself told. Caroline says, when it comes to the strikes, they're having an effect on hard-working business owners and employees of SMEs. Our customers don't care, she says, about delays receiving their goods, etc. when it comes to the strikes. What she's saying is that it's the companies, the small businesses that are going to be the casualties of this strike action. Let me know your thoughts on that. Peter says, Michelle, according to your guest then, the public servants feel so demeaned that they are forced to strike. But if you take the total remuneration, the public sector, compare it to the private sector, he says, the public sector don't do badly at all. And he says, as a taxpayer, it's me that feels demeaned being expected to pay for the post service that I'm receiving from the public sector. Emma Burnell was shaking her head. I think she doesn't agree with you. Right, let's see, she definitely doesn't. Cool, you see that face? Goodness me. Right, Tory MP.
That's my January face.
That's your January face, is it? Cool, blimey, we're only in, what, third day of January? What day is it, the 3rd? And that's your face already?
That's my face already.
We've got to work on it. We've got to try and cheer you up anyway by the end of January. Anyway, food banks, right? A Tory MP has come under fire, basically, because the Fire Brigade Union has tweeted that many firefighters that are earning around about £32,000 are being forced to use food banks. The Tory MP, Brendan Clark-Smith, who's the MP for Bassetlaw, he basically said that in a nutshell, these people simply need to learn how to budget and prioritise. What do you think to that?
So it's interesting. It's on the face of it, it's one of those classic social media hoo-has in which, you know, Tory MP's monstered for saying something very sort of Tory-ish in his way. But then look at what he's replying to. FBU effectively is saying, in its wording, almost implying that firefighters, if they're living on 32,000, end up having to go to food banks. You know, I've no doubt that some will do and have, but not all of them, I would wager. So that's where it's kind of almost overly generalist, and so he's trying to push back, saying that, you know, thrift is a value.
Yeah, and that was the point that he was making. He was actually, to credit him in full, he was basically saying that there will be exceptions where people need to do that, but he was getting tired of the kind of it being wheeled out, that sentence being wheeled out, Emma, as almost standard, or nurses having to use food banks, firefighters having to use food banks. He's saying that generalisation of the overuse of that term is what he is pushing back on.
Well, it's disgusting that a single person in this country, particularly a public servant, has to use a food bank, and that's all there is to it. And he should know better than to be leaning so hard into that evil Tory stereotype, because frankly, it was unnecessary. Social media is not the place to have a subtle, nuanced conversation about how we can manage different ways and things. But to be honest, the reason that people might suddenly find themselves, if they're 32,000 2 years ago, they've only had a 2% pay rise. In the meantime, their mortgage or rent has gone up significantly. Childcare costs have gone up significantly. Food prices are going up 10 to 12%. It's not the case of not being able to budget. They were probably budgeting perfectly well 2 or 3 years ago, but now it's just they haven't got the money to budget with. And he may well have been making some subtle point, but you don't do that on Twitter, and he knows better than that.
Well, my viewer, Trev, he says, Michelle, it's a simple fact that some people will take anything for free. It's all a part of life. He says, if you can't live on £32,000 a year, there is something wrong. So what do you say to that? So many of my viewers, and I've got a lot of people as well that are writing in there on pensions, for example, they're saying that they would give their right arm, basically, I'm paraphrasing, but they'd give their right arm to be able to earn £32,000.
Well, if you're on a pension, you will have had the triple lock, so your income will have been protected in a way that a worker's has not been. So if your wages have gone up 2%, but your costs have gone up somewhere between 10 and 15%, your mortgage has gone up 5%, or your rent has gone up significantly higher than that because rents are outstripping mortgages. You've got 2 or 3 children that you could budget for perfectly well 2 or 3 years ago when you had them, and now the childcare costs are outstripping the cost of feeding your children. Something we all probably want people to be able to do is that being outstripped by 10, 12%. This is not a question of people not being sensible or prudent. People are really, really struggling. And some of them, at the sharper end, are going to have to go and have to ask, humiliatingly. Nobody wants to go. Your viewer, Trev, may have a darker view of humanity than I do. People don't want to ask for help. They find it very difficult. Even the people at the sharpest end don't, want to be giving back rather than asking for more.
Well, there's probably two types of people, to be fair, isn't there? There's probably
there's
probably a type of... You've got to acknowledge it, though. There's probably a type of person that is struggling, is very proud, doesn't want to ask for help, and to go to a food bank is probably the height of shame and embarrassment. Absolutely, those people exist, and that is awful and tragic. But that doesn't take away from the fact that there will also be people that think, hang on just a nanosecond, why should I spend my 50 quid on food when I can get it for free over there?
Well, again, I mean, we've talked about this before. There are usually most food banks have quite a stringent, referral policy. Not all of them, but most of them. The vast majority do. And my mother works in a food bank, so she sees these people every day. These are not people who are chancing their arm. You don't chance your arm with my mum, trust me. These are people who need help. They don't want to ask for help. When I was working in a homeless shelter over Christmas, these are people, again, people who are embarrassed at times that they're having to get to that situation and desperately wanting to turn their lives around. So this isn't a case... We cannot lose our sense of humanity. And I think... And I'm taking this away from the individual MPs tweeting, but sometimes on social media we can come across as really losing our sense of humanity. And I think that is where we all lose out in the public sphere.
I don't think people lose their sense of humanity. I think people are trying to mix in their sense of humanity with a dash of realism. I think that an awful lot of people in this country, a lot of you, I can see that you're writing it and you're telling me your earnings, many of which are not coming anywhere close to £32,000. And there is a huge sentiment out there that people perhaps have to learn to cut their cloth. And I would agree, actually, that many people do need to learn to cut their cloth a little bit. But I'd push back to you guys at home and ask you then, if you've cut your cloth, you've done everything possible, and you still are struggling, what then? You tell me. I'm going to take a quick break. When I come back, I want to talk to you about something that caught my eye today. As a woman in the world of work, do you think I should be legally entitled to have it disclosed to me what my male counterparts, my male colleagues, those people in the world of work earn? Is it my business? I don't think so. But do you? Tell me and I'll see you in 2.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Hello there, welcome back to Dewbs & Co. with me, Michelle Dewberry, alongside me, Emma Burnell, the political commentator, and Asa Bennett, who's the former advisor to Liz Truss. We've just been talking, by the way, about what you can and can't afford on 32 grand a year. I'm always fascinated by this. And I do want to get into it a bit more one of these days. What is a good salary in this country? What do you think is reasonable to earn? At what point do you think, once you start going below this threshold, then we've really got problems? I don't know. You tell me your thoughts. £32,000, firefighters, many of them being forced to use food banks, apparently. Some people saying that's just ridiculous. Other people saying it's a state of the nation. Brian says, Michelle, what we need to lose is the sense of entitlement in this country. That's Brian's view there. It really has divided you about this situation. Many people are furious with what you've just said about the triple lock situation, pointing out that the triple lock is pensions that you've all paid into. Francis says the triple lock was broken last year. We only got a 3.2% rise. The triple lock only comes to play in April. Pensioners have been missing out, says Francis. Lots of you getting in touch saying pensions are not benefits at all. They're contributions that you guys have made over your working lives. Right, let's talk working lives, shall we? This whole gender pay gap, we go on and on about it, don't we? Let's cut to the chase. Should women have the legal right to know what their colleagues are paid? This is all a survey, perhaps. Females in the Red Wall constituencies, 71% of them, apparently, these females said that they'd be more likely to vote for a party that introduced such a legally enforceable policy. Asa.
It's a really interesting survey. I can really understand why 7 out of 10 female voters would have said, yes, they want to know what their male colleagues are paid, because that'd be really empowering. It would be really interesting to know, that transparency would win out and they would be able to go back into the rooms of their bosses, the negotiating hands strengthened, and, have really negotiate harder for what they deserve. However, it's interesting. I'm not sure we're ready for this sort of Scandinavian-style society in which everyone knows how much everyone else earns, sort of thing. It's almost like you're opening a Pandora's box there of, with certain issues that would be entailed in that process. But then to say something constructive on this, if I may, because I'm wary of sounding like I'm sort of mansplaining on this issue. I'm aware that there are things you can do to help really democratise things and level the playing field in the workplace. So, for example, it is shown in evidence that if you publish salary bands for jobs rather than have it as it's competitive and, to be negotiated, then you're really helping, you're breaking open the closed shop, the old boys club. So you can do stuff like that, for example. You can also include in your job ads, and it's proven in evidence, and it encourages women to apply if flexible working is involved with those sort of jobs. So there are other things you could do, but I'm not sure this is the one.
Emma?
I think everybody should. I wouldn't say just women should be entitled to know what men earn, but vice versa. I think sunshine is the best disinfectant. Understanding pay transparency. It might be better, or maybe if we were to phase this in by doing it through publishing bands, employing people at different band levels, that might be a way of introducing it in a way that doesn't cause a complete immediate chaos, because I think what would come out with that transparency would be quite shocking to many, many people.
What do you think to the gender pay gap?
I think it's appalling. I think there are two issues to it. Also, I would call it the sex pay gap, but that's because I'm not a big fan of gender. But
what's appalling about it? So to be clear, in the UK generally, there's a 14.9% so-called gender pay gap. What does that mean to you?
Well, it means that, in general, we tend to favour the kinds of work that women traditionally do, and they are paid lower. And then, equally, there are penalties that people face for having children. And that child bearing is singularly done by women, and childcare is still predominantly done by women. And so there are points in your career. So quite often younger women are actually paid to a certain equality, particularly when you're talking about more graduate level jobs. Less so when we're talking about the division between traditionally male working class jobs and traditionally female working class jobs. But actually, even at that graduate level, that falls away as women take time out of the workforce to have babies, and then are usually the ones who will do the lion's share of the childcare for those children. Now, I don't want to see a system whereby women are penalised for their natural biology and their biological role, and I don't want to see a system whereby men are not an integral part of raising their children. And I think there must be a way of making the system better and fairer to both parties.
See, I've got to say, I find all this gender pay stuff a bit ridiculous. So when I hear this statistic of, oh, there's this 14% pay gap between men and women in this country, I understand that as a woman, I'm supposed to feel like you. I'm supposed to be, what did you say, despicable, appalling. I know that I'm supposed to feel like that because that is what I'm being told, that I'm suppressed just because I happen to have a vagina as opposed to a penis, although in these days, goodness only knows, even that's up for debate, but whatever. I don't feel like that. I don't think it is disgraceful. I think it's a stupid statistic that, if anything, at best, should only ever be used to start a conversation, not to reach a conclusion. It pays no attention to different roles, the amount of hours people work, what they've qualified in, what their background is. So I think that this it's a huge, blunt weapon that gets smashed around to try and make women feel like we are suppressed.
No,
and
I don't think
feel like
that's
we're suppressed at
I don't
all.
think that's the case at all, Michelle. I think, if anything, it is the start of a conversation about how we change the workforce, the workplace, to make sure that women have equal opportunities to earn equally.
But we do have equal opportunities.
But we don't, because we don't have a situation in which you are not penalised for taking in time out for having children.
But if you're going to have time out to have a child, which is a personal choice, then of course your earnings are going to be impacted.
But we all, as a society, need women to have children.
Of course.
So why are we therefore making it less attractive for women to have children?
So if you and I both decide to have a child and we're both at the same point in our
together,
career,
Michelle, it's
well,
too
not
fast.
Together, but we'll throw Asa into the mix. She can get involved in here. Sorry, Asa. But I feel like I need to push back against this constant notion that as a woman I'm somehow, like restricted and suppressed. It's nonsense to me. I have a child. My earnings will perhaps be impacted because I can't work all the hours God sends because of my little boy, but nor do I want to. I'm happy to take a dint in my earnings to have this beautiful gift of a child, and I think
but why should that gift that you are also giving society penalise you and not the partner that you father the father of the child?
What do you mean?
Well, you're presumably, if there's a pay gap between you and the father of your child, aren't you equal parents?
Well, first and foremost, I don't buy this ridiculous notion that there is a pay gap between me and my partner based purely on he earns this and I earn this.
But he's not had a career break, presumably.
But I don't buy this notion of this gender pay gap, this 14.9% pointing to a flaw in society. It's nonsense. You can't just take the earnings of Asa and apply the earnings of me and declare that there is an issue.
But that's not what it is. That's not how statistics works. This is a statistic taken across society and across the different levels of pay for the whole of society.
Which is why it's nonsensical, because why do you take this instrument as a man...
Again, as I said at the beginning, part of the problem is that division of traditional labour. The kinds of jobs that we see paid lower are the kinds of jobs that traditionally have been occupied and still are by women.
You may.
So,
yes.
Yes, there's one. It's very much a blunt instrument, the gender pay gap. It's a conversation starter in many ways. But then if you drill down, businesses are obliged to publish their gender pay differentials, but then it only helps so much. So
certain businesses, yeah.
Big businesses. Yeah. And so if you take, let's say, big airlines, often it will show a very stark gender pay gap, but equally that's more often than not the story of men are more likely to be pilots and women are more likely to be on cabin crew, and they are paid differently, but due to the sort of skills, the training that each job requires, and as a result, because of the domination in specific professions like that, it looks like there's a real imbalance. So, I mean, obviously, it's an example in a broad trend of why, actually, in a weird way, I suppose you're arguing for transparency publishing everyone's pay.
Absolutely. And I don't think it should be just available to women. I think this is something that would be helpful to all of society to just be a bit more open about this sort of thing.
Cool. What are you at home? Would you want your pay being publicly available or available within your world of work? I wouldn't. I think what I earn is nobody's business apart from my business and the person who is paying me. If you think, or anyone thinks, I'm not paid enough and Ace is earning more than me, well, I need to pull on my big gal pants and learn to negotiate a little bit better to get myself a better deal. I don't need to start crying.
And one of the ways to negotiate is to know the terrain in which you are negotiating.
Or it is to simply have an innate sense of your value and what your worth is and have the kahunas to negotiate.
Well, I personally would never, ever equate wearing your gonads on the outside as bravery, but that's...
Well, that's a good point. We'll agree on that one. We shall agree on that one. Oh, I don't know, ladies and gents, if I can call it that these days at home. What do you think to it? I just think that there is this whole notion in society all the time that everyone thinks that they're suppressed and oppressed and whatever these words are. I do believe that you can have and do and be anything in your career if you make choice, and sometimes choices come with an element of compromise and sacrifice, and that is a healthy life. And if you're someone that sits there and says, oh, well, I'm so restricted because I've had kids, well, get your partner to pull their pants up a little bit and share the parenting then. How about that? How come everything seems to be...
But they should absolutely do that. There we agree.
Well, there you go. We got there in the end. A point of agreement. You tell me, how interested are you in whatever anyone else makes? Quite frankly, I couldn't care less what other people make. It's each to their own and everyone is responsible. All staff, Alan says, should know all salary bands for all the jobs, not just the females. Keith says it's up to an employer to pay someone what they think they are worth. Phil says, well, brickies earn good money. Nothing stopping women becoming brickies. June says, years ago, a list of everyone's salary came to me by mistake. She pushed it onto the factory workforce. It brought her a great deal of satisfaction. There you go. Give me your thoughts overnight. I'll have a read. It'll interest me. But for now, Nigel Farage is up next. Nigel, I won't ask you what you earn.
Thank you very much.
I'll let you off the hook with that one. What have you got for us?
Evening. Thank you. Very spirited debate, as ever. Well, I just can't believe it. I mean, we were told the government was going to test people coming in from China, given that COVID's out of control there. Now we're told the tests are voluntary, and even if you test positive, you don't need to isolate. Yet at the same time, senior cabinet ministers are saying you've got to wear face masks in public if you've got the sniffles. I'm debating tonight, are we getting this all very wrong again? But before all of that, let's get the all-important weather.
Hello again, it's Aidan McGivern here from the Met Office. The rain that we've seen through the day continues overnight, but for many it turns drier into Wednesday, although it stays windy, and that wind bringing very mild air for the time of year, a southwesterly fetch, tightly packed isobars, all this warmth coming towards the UK, even for northern Scotland where it has been cold during the last couple of days. Temperatures are rising here now and some outbreaks of rain are spreading north as well. The rain heaviest and most persistent across central parts of Scotland, combined with snowmelt, could cause some issues, and wet for parts of Wales. That could also cause issues overnight. But the rain eases, it pushes away. Many places turning drier by the end of the night, but it stays windy and it stays very mild. 12 Celsius in the south, 5 to 8 across Scotland and Northern Ireland. Into the start of Wednesday, rain clears from the southeast quick enough, but it lingers across northeast Scotland for a time through the morning. Otherwise, it's showers for many. More persistent rain, mostly confined to southern Scotland, northwest England, but brighter and drier weather compared with Tuesday, at least for most. And it is mild, 14 Celsius in the south, 8 to 10 Celsius in the northern half of the UK. Some damp weather around the southwest towards the end of the afternoon. That will continue for parts of Cornwall into the evening and overnight. Cloudier skies towards the southwest and some cloud elsewhere. But generally speaking, the clearest air will be in the east and the north. And that's where the lowest temperatures will be as we start off Thursday. But it's not going to be a cold start to the day, only slightly less mild compared with Wednesday morning. It's going to be bright in the east and the north first thing, a touch of frost for northern Scotland, but for the rest of the UK, cloudier skies, and that cloud spreads across all areas by the afternoon. Some light outbreaks of rain and drizzle for England and Wales, more persistent rain expected for Scotland and Northern Ireland by the end of the day, and it's here where it will turn increasingly windy as well, with the risk of gales in places overnight.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way.
Headliners, the late night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewbs, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dewbs and Co. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewbs, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Dewbs and Co.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening. You can walk into the country scot-free from China without testing. But if you're British and you've got the sniffles, you'd better put a mask on. That's the message coming today. I'll be asking, are we getting it all wrong? Prince Harry says, I want my father and brother back, but does he deserve to be welcomed back into the fold? We'll discuss and debate that. I'll give you some coal consumption figures that will really make you sit up and think. And on Talking Pints, I'll be joined by Charles Ray, veteran journalist, held big jobs at The Sun and other newspapers, including being a royal reporter for many years. I'll get his take on Prince Harry too. All of that in just a moment. First, let's get the news with Aaron Armstrong.
Hello, I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. Rail passengers will face continued disruption for the rest of the week because of a fresh round of strikes by the RMT union. Roughly half of Britain's railway lines are closed, with only a fifth of services running. Many places, including most of Scotland and Wales, have no trains running at all. The Transport Secretary, Mark Harper, says the government has offered a very fair pay offer, but the RMT maintains there's been no new proposal and is accusing the government of blocking an agreement. The Health Secretary is blaming the triple threat of COVID, flu and Strep A cases for the extra pressure being put on the NHS. Steve Barclay's comments come amid mounting concern over the winter crisis, with more than a dozen NHS trusts and ambulance services declaring critical incidents over the festive period. Medical experts say up to 500 people are dying each week as a result of delays in urgent care. But Steve Barclay says the government has a plan to help free up beds.
Focusing the funding onto the operations backlogs, for example, getting more diagnostic hubs in place, getting the surgical hubs that we're rolling out, getting the backlog from the pandemic reduced. That's been the key priority. That's where we've surged additional funding. But we also recognise the big pressure that we're seeing played through in terms of ambulance handover delays is largely triggered by those who are fit to leave hospital but delayed in doing so. And we need to free up that bed capacity, and that is often about having the right social care provision to do so.